Hi, welcome. My name is Chris, and I'm here with MaryJo Sharp, and she's just delivered a talk at the Apologetics Canada Conference entitled An Open Dialogue with an Atheist. And so now we have the great opportunity just to have a conversation, and I get to ask you some questions that were tweeted in and also prepared just about your talk.
All right.
So,
sounds good.
Yeah, awesome. So let me start off by asking, in your portion about how to convert atheists, that one-on-one conversation. The question is, sometimes arguments from skeptics are smokescreens because of hurt from Christians, the church, or personal traumatic experience. How can a Christian decipher and deal with that in a one-on-one conversation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And one of the things you have to be careful of is you have to be careful of discerning this particular thing, because you don't want to offend the person. You don't want to be like, you just have an emotional problem, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to do that. So one of the things that you can do is you can talk to them. You can ask them questions about, like in my talk, I was saying, ask them to support what they are saying. And by doing that, you're not just saying, hey, you need to support your view. It actually helps you see whether their objection is intellectual or whether it is emotional, by getting back to what's the reasoning for this. And as you do that, you may actually find that they will tell you something like, well, I went to a church and it was just full of hypocrites. They would say this, but they would do that. And I actually myself started to doubt what I believed about God based in behaviors I saw in the church as well as in myself. So apologetics kind of helps you discern that in general by asking questions, getting to the root causes of things.
Right.
I think that in general, just apologetics in general, and learning to help people discover what they believe will help you discern whether it's emotional or intellectual.
Right. Awesome. In a recent TED Talk, Alain de Botton, an atheist, an author, proposed atheism 2.0, basically that they can start to borrow from religion. Do you think that there is a growing discontentment with the new atheism movement? And if so, what does that mean for Christians?
Yeah. I do think there is a growing discontentment. I've heard people say that they don't like the new atheist representation of atheism. It's mean. It doesn't have existential value for people. That it's not a good representative. Like I've often said, well, if this is the proper outworking of your beliefs, do I have to become bitter and mean and disengaged and those sorts of things? So that's interesting. That atheism 2.0. I think this is good for Christians because it's showing that Christianity has real value in what it teaches, and that the morals and the ethics and what it teaches in those areas are true. And those are things that people are recognizing. They're recognizing where perhaps atheism is bankrupt in those areas.
Right. Good. You mentioned there in conversation with people, there's 4 things to do. The first one was know why we believe. And so I'm going to ask a few questions in that line. Why do you think there is an anti-intellectual sentiment amongst evangelicals?
Why do I think there's anti-intellectual? I think there's a lot of reasons. I think there's some history behind that with maybe the philosophical movement of the 60s, the God is Dead movement, and the church's response to that, kind of taking our philosophical ideas and our culture and like taking our ball and playing in our own court instead of staying engaged. There's some history there, but I also think there might be some fear that maybe we don't have the answers because we haven't explored these areas. This is where apologetics comes into play and says, hey, you need to know what you believe and why you believe it and build that confidence so that, we do engage intellectually. Right. But I think there's multiple reasons why, and there's some history behind it.
Right.
But for right now, where we're at, it may be a little bit of, well, I'm not confident in what I believe.
Right.
So I don't want to engage in all that because what if I find out I don't believe it?
Right.
Yeah, that could be kind of scary, you know? But it's something that we need to do because we're trying to be honest and truthful.
Yeah.
So I don't want to believe in Christianity just because maybe I grew up in church or, my parents believed it. I want to believe in it because it's true.
Right.
So that's one of the things there.
Cool. Your ministry, Confident Christianity, probably addresses some of that stuff. Can you just talk about why you picked Confident Christianity?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, actually, we had a choice. There was 2 Chicks Apologetics, and that's what William Lane Craig and Gary Habermas like. And then there's Confident Christianity. And the reason we go with Confident Christianity is because it exudes that kind of idea that we want Christians to get to the point where they are confident. We have good answers. There's good reasons to believe in God. There's good reasons to believe Jesus is God. So we want Christians to understand you can have confidence in what you believe. And I believe J.P. Moreland talked about this, that you can grow in the confidence in your faith and what you believe over time, especially. So.
Tons of hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let me ask this. How can pastors and church leaders who have attended this conference be more intentional about equipping their people to answer these tough questions about Christianity?
Okay, be more intentional. Obviously, the first thing that would come to mind is just to do apologetics, right?
Yeah.
To go out there and find a study that'll fit their people. For me, I would say if I were starting something up, first of all, I would establish like a need for it in the church. Why do we need apologetics? What is the importance of apologetics? And for me, a lot of that was transformation of my own spiritual life. But also just kind of, they could do like a survey of the church of what the church is interested in. What are the issues that church is actually dealing with?
Right.
What are the problems that they see? Like, is it the evolution question? Is it the God is a moral monster kind of question? Is he a moral monster in the Old Testament? How do I reconcile these things? But very much they can talk about it from the pulpit.
Yeah.
That's number one.
Yeah.
You know, they talk about it from the pulpit, then they can survey their people, find out where their people are at, what questions they have, and then they can find a study to fit those needs.
Right.
And I think that's very intentional, and that would help the people get excited and get involved.
Awesome. That's great. Many people hear the word philosophy and immediately think of their almost failing mark during their freshman year at university. How can the average person engage in philosophical study and discussion?
Oh, wow. That's a good one. The average person. Well, one of the things we need to do is we need to break down what these terms mean and get back to the original terms, like a love of wisdom. I mean, who doesn't want to have a love of wisdom, right? You know, who doesn't want to be a person who studies to grow in knowledge? So basically, we just need to define terms for people, and then we need to introduce them at a level where they're at. Yeah. Just find out where they're at and start there. I call it translating. You know, instead of using all the big terms, the big theological and philosophical terms, I got to grasp on those, but I bring them to a point where you describe to the person what you're talking about. A lot of people get that. Yeah. And that was important to me as a junior high band director. That's what I used to do. Take big musical terms, bring them to my kids who had to learn those things, but they couldn't learn them at the level of a college student or of a PhD in that area. So that's what we want to do too, is we want to introduce it to where they're at.
Awesome, great. Let me move on to your next topic or next idea was listen, the active listening and what that means. I work with young adults, and so my context is I have a lot of young passionate people about truth, which is great. What are the negative effects of a passionate person who doesn't listen?
Oh, wow. So many. You have so many. They can turn people off from the Christian faith altogether, give them excuses for not investigating their beliefs further. Some of the things that really bother me is that we build straw men, and so we're actually building what's not true about a person's belief or like about atheism in general or something like that, and then we argue against what's not true. That's not helpful to the people. That's not helpful to the people we're trying to witness to. So those are some of the pitfalls of not being a good listener, but being really passionate. And it kind of confirms stereotypes of Christians. So absolutely. We want to be the people who break down those stereotypes.
Good. The listening, we have to be active listeners in a one-on-one conversation with a skeptic. What if they are not listening to you?
Oh, that's not good. Of course, we want to be really gracious because we've been given much grace by Jesus. But at the same time, you don't want to spend a long amount of time with a person that's just being kind of dishonest with you and not engaging with you. I mean, we're either going to have a conversation about truth or they're just going to cling to their presuppositions and then we just go nowhere. So you don't want to spend a long time with a person that's not willing to listen to you as well.
Good. That's good advice. One of the tweeted in questions was, apathy is a major barrier for sharing your faith in Canada. How can you approach apathy?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Our culture,
I think there's kind of like a general way to approach it, and then there's like an individual way that you can approach this, and they do relate. Generally speaking, if you want to approach apathy, you go after something that the culture is that's a hot button issue in the culture. Right. So I'm not sure all of the issues up in Canada, but in America it would be abortion and homosexuality, same-sex marriage, those sorts of things. Yeah. When you start talking on those sorts of things, people pay attention. They're not so apathetic anymore.
Right.
You know, they start to come after you. They start to come back and say, "Hey, well, I don't believe that," and they get passionate and they get involved.
Yeah.
If you're not that bold, you might find something else more like the environment.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't want to get into those issues,
Yeah.
maybe it's the environment. Now, I said generally, so
Yeah.
that's like on in the public square. You can also do this in an individual level by finding out what that individual is passionate about, and then you make an argument from there, and
Right.
you show them they really do care about
Yeah.
these things.
Right.
So it would be good to find out why they believe what they believe.
Right. Good. Thank you. One of the tensions or the temptations maybe in one-on-one conversation with a skeptic or whoever that may be is to make stuff up as you go. If you don't know, that you start to make it up. How do you address that sort of innate reaction to appear smarter than what you actually are?
You mean people do that?
I think so. Yeah.
I'm always one of those ones like, thanks for letting me speak with Paul Paul
yeah.
Copan and JP Morgan.
Yeah.
No, that's a good question, and I know that there are people that they deal
Yeah.
with this. You just can't do it. You have to avoid that temptation because it's a bad witness towards what's true. It's a bad witness for the Lord Jesus Christ because it's not demonstrating integrity.
Yeah.
So when you don't know something, don't make up an answer. Just say, I don't know. And that's actually a powerful testimony for a Christian. I mean, I can't believe I'm saying this, but for a Christian to say, I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, that's right. You talked about the importance of asking questions. And to articulate questions very, very well. One of the questions I have about that was, how do we get people to talk at a deep level like this when our culture is so enamored with surface level things?
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, how does somebody bring it to that deep level where you're talking about worldview and those important issues?
Oh, yeah. I use everything. Whatever a person's interested in, I start with that. So if we're all talking politics, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's surface level, kind of not, but we can all talk politics.
Yeah.
So politics is great because how do you decide what you believe in order to vote for people or to establish what you think about an issue?
Yeah.
Well, that gets back to what's good. Well, how do you define what's good?
Yeah.
And I actually do that with people. I'll say, well, you know, back home when we went through our last presidential election, it was, well, we need to vote with family members. We need to vote in the good people, you know?
Yeah.
Well, who are the good people?
And why?
And why do you think they're good?
Right.
So you can actually take politics and everyday conversational items and you can lead them back to, well, where are you getting that from?
So it's finding those catalysts that will launch you into those deeper conversations.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Cool. You talked about responding. The Christians need to respond properly. One of the questions I have is, worldviews are deeply personal. Very, very, very personal, because it's about right and wrong, like what you've been talking about. And our conversations never operate strictly in intellect. It goes to the heart. So how do we get and to maybe switch from apologist to counselor? Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. How do we switch?
Or do you switch?
You do. Quite frequently, I give a talk on the problem of evil, and I'll have somebody that said, why did God take my husband of 42 years, my best friend? And now all of a sudden, I'm not answering an intellectual or philosophical argument. I'm answering emotional hurt, so I do automatically switch into counselor mode. How we get there, I mean, you just have to be sensitive to what's going on. If a person has an emotional question like that, then it's time to switch over. It's time to be there and actually pay attention, listen to them. Tell me about the story. What happened? What's your response to this? Just take more interest in that person that you see as hurting than in trying to prove your point, because the Holy Spirit's going to draw them to God, not you. So you're just there. You get to be a vehicle of the kingdom work. So you're just there for them. When you hear that,
relationships are intricate. And so when you're sitting with somebody on the plane and you're sharing faith, it might be a little bit easier than with a family member or with. So how do you navigate those tough waters when it comes to this one-on-one conversation?
Yeah, my family knows because we do this a lot. You just have to, your family. You can ask them questions in your style that your family's used to, but you have to know when you stop. You have to know where you've gone as far as you can go for that conversation, and then you leave it. it, and then hope that you will have another time to talk.
Right.
And then there's a certain point at which you have to go, again, I'm not in control of this.
Yeah.
That person's belief is between them and God.
Right.
Whether they're your spouse or your dad, your mom, your child.
Right.
So at a certain point, you just have to let it go. But yeah, find the stopping point, and don't press so far beyond that it gets ugly.
Yeah, fireworks go off. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
You're leaving the door open for another time.
Yeah, for sure. One of the responses usually in our culture, especially in Canada, is this relativism. That you might have some good arguments, but they'll say, well, that's your truth. That's really good for you. What's your response in a conversation like that? How would you respond?
Well, that's a tough one, because if you do the philosophical response where you say, oh, you're saying that's true for me, is that true for everybody? They may not pick up on their absolutism. They think they're a relativist.
Right.
But they're actually saying something that's an absolute truth.
Right.
So if you can get that point across, like, well, when you say that's true for me but not for you, do you mean that that's a principle that you believe in that's true for everybody at all times? Well, then you believe something that's true for everybody at all times. If you can get there, that's good.
Yeah.
You may have to back and forth with them a little bit to get them to see that, because again, we're not very good at reasoning in our societies. I know in America, definitely, we're having to teach logic along the way.
Same here,
So that may not be something that they're going to get right off the bat, because how long has it been since they took a critical reasoning course, or have they ever?
Right.
And not to be rude, it's difficult to think that way when you haven't been through those courses.
Right.
So I would definitely try to point out that they're really not relativist.
Right.
That they believe things that are true for everybody at all times, even if it's that one truth.
Right. Okay, good. Just a few closing questions. I just want to make the connection in your talk. You said that, quote, like, we don't bring people to God. That's the Holy Spirit, which is great. And then you also talked about at the beginning of your talk that we carry often too much burden as Christians to try to get this person to saving knowledge of Jesus. Can you just talk to people who are carrying that burden?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's not yours.
Yeah.
And I mean, you need to, I've noticed that when I let that go, that God gives me a whole bunch more opportunities to talk to people, because I don't feel the need to have this gospel presentation in this order every time I go and speak to somebody. That way I can just sit down and there's somebody there that, maybe I start engaging with because they have a child, and I start talking, and I can just have a great conversation with them.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they're surprised that I'm a Christian. That I'm not just trying to force certain packaged view of a presentation on them.
Yeah.
But really, you need to let that go. If you believe in the sovereignty of God, He is in control, and we're not.
Yeah.
We're not. So we can't force it on a person.
Yeah.
And once you let that go, I believe you'll have some opportunities that will open up for conversation.
That's great. What is a practical next step for a Christian who wants to be better equipped to engage their non-believing friends?
Oh man! First of all, I would get Timothy Keller. I don't know if he's a doctor.
He is.
Timothy Keller's Reason for God.
Yeah.
Especially if you're kind of like at a basic level with apologetics, that's a great place to start, because he's a pastor.
Yeah.
And he built his church on making apologetic arguments. And then I would go to Greg Koukl, his book Tactics. And he actually goes into detail on how to engage people and how to lead a conversation and go back and forth. Cool. And he's so winsome and he's so gracious that it's great, because you're gonna find that when you use his tactics, that you actually have these great conversations with people. Right. And it doesn't feel like you're shoving your religion on somebody. Right. It just feels like you're sitting down having a great conversation with the person. Right. So I would suggest those two resources: get started and then practice.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds silly, right?
Yeah.
But you should practice. I practice with church members. I practice with the radio. Yeah. I'll listen to politicians and I'll question them and I'll back and forth with them, if I don't want to go to a person right away.
Right.
I know it sounds silly, but it's true. You need to practice. Who are good conversationalists?
Yeah.
Some people, but not everybody. So we actually have to practice these things.
Good. My next question is, all of this is assuming that Christians have non-Christian friends. What if they don't?
It's time to get out of the bubble.
Amen. Yeah, good. Thank you.
I do a lot of work with women's ministries, and I'm like, man, it's time. We have great fellowship in women's ministries, but it is time to go back out into the mission field. Yeah. Take your women's ministry out there, equip them with apologetics, do some great mission work, and talk to the people. These are God's people this is his creation, and they are interesting. Yeah. Get out there and talk to them and have these great discussions. So, yes, awesome. Get out of the bubble.
My final question is talk about the apologetic of lifestyle. And you talked about this in your lecture, just about how important it is that our lifestyle and our love for everyone is a driving force behind our apologetics. Talk about lifestyle apologetics.
Yeah. I don't want it to come across as like, if you do these, like, you have to have a perfect life in order to be a good witness. Because no, that's against Christian doctrine, right? Yeah. But basically, if we're going to go out and we're going to make good arguments, we have to do so with a Christian ethic. Yeah. And an ethic out of love for the other person. The reason that you're engaging to begin with is out of respect for other people. Yeah. I talk to Muslims and I don't study their beliefs so I can tear it down, you know? I study their beliefs so I can understand it better because I respect them as a person. Yeah. And I engage with their ideas because they are worthy of being engaged with. Right. That's why. And as Christians, boy, when we go out there, we have to maintain a high ethical standard as far as our engagements and how we present our arguments. Right. Because that's going to reflect on our witness, just like the arguments are going to reflect. They go together. Yeah. And they are equally strong, the way which we present and what we present. So. Right.
And that authenticity.
Yeah.
In those conversations.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. That you actually care about the person. Exactly. And you're not just trying to beat them down you're wrong, you know? Totally. That you actually care about them. So that's important.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah,
MaryJo
you're
Sharp.
welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. Apologetics Canada Conference 2012.